Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat. I'm with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Welcome everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join me in fellowship this evening as we come to you streaming live out of near Athens, Georgia for the next 2 hours, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, here every Wednesday evening on Studio B at freedomslips.com, Revolution Radio. I have as guest with me this evening Brooks Agnew, which he's a very impressive individual, and I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to go on his show just about a week ago or a few days ago, and we had incredible dialogue and shared a lot of good information with his listening audience. And so I have the opportunity to reverse roles and to be the interviewer this evening. And so we'll introduce Brooks. I want to give you a little bit as far as his bio, the information that is connected to the incredible endeavors that he's already accomplished and the things that he is doing. He entered the Air Force in '73, graduated top of his class in electronics engineering, received honors and a bachelor's in chemistry from Tennessee Technological University. He's a 6-time Amazon best-selling author and internationally renowned lecturer on the exploration of the earth and the physics of soul. He is also a host of X2 Radio, I believe that's Truth Frequency Network, exploring the mysteries of the universe and the earth, which comes every Sunday evening from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. He'll give you the lowdown on the specific links and provide that for you. I'm not sure if he has access to chat room, but if he does, then he can provide that there. If not, he can give it to me in Skype, and I'll pass it along to you as listening audience. He is also a multi-patented engineer and currently the CEO of a manufacturing company producing the nation's first affordable electric pickup truck, of which one of his listeners who sent some information to me and thanked me and asked me about the poem that I had written and shared with Brooks told me that the trucks are just awesome in aspect, and so I definitely want to find out more about that as well. But Brooks, are you with us, brother?
I am here.
Well, thanks for taking the time to join us this evening, and we'll kind of go into a lot of different things. You did give me a small outline of topics, which are, things that I also am interested in. And I could tell just by the interview that we did prior that you're very eloquent in your ability to speak on many different topics. And so we should have an interesting conversation this evening. But if you would, before we go into it, which we'll, first talk about how you came to knowledge and discernment on some of these issues. But if you would, tell us about your books and your website, your radio programs, share the links, and, if you do take mail from the listening audience, how it is that they can contact you and inquire about all these things.
Sure. Well, the first 4 books are a series of books called The Arc of Millions of Years. Of course, you could buy them on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or all the online sellers, or you can go to arcofmillionsofyears.com, like Noah's Ark. And if you buy from there, you will get the book, but you'll also get it autographed, and you'll get the first 2 volumes for free in the form of audiobooks. So if you're not a really good reader, don't worry about it. I read it for you. And then the 5th book is a book called Remembering the Future, The Physics of the Soul and Time Travel. And it, I guess it kind of turned out to be more of a self-help book than anything else, but it covers the physics of the soul, how our individual conscious energy is added to the energy of the universe and specifically the earth, and sort of a better definition of what you can do with that energy on purpose to affect your life condition, the bounty of it and relationships and everything else. And that one can also be bought at any of the online sellers, or you can go to rememberingthefuturebook.com because it's also a part of a screenplay for a movie. So there'll be another website in the not too distant future for a movie. And the same thing applies. You get the book autographed and you get the entire book in audio for free if you order it from there. And the final book was sort of a culmination of maybe my observations and a possible solution to the dilemma we find ourselves in with relation to our federal government, in the sense that Congress has lost control of the country and the executive has taken over. So it's a book called Alienated Nation, The New Path to Liberty. It came out in 2012, and it outlines a path of a short list of amendments that we could make to the Constitution as states, rather than going through the federal government through a constitutional convention. This would be an Article 5 convention that would basically fix the problem and disconnect the agency government that now rules our country and allow us to get back to a republic.
Well, that's fascinating work. Because I want to pick up right there and to look into your solution, get you to present that to us. But before we do, your website and contact.
Yeah, the best website, you can get to everything from there, is x2radio.com. And my email is just bagnew@x2-radio.com. So all of the links to all the books and the lecture series, and if you need to book me somewhere, all the links and everything are there.
Excellent. Well, let's pick up with the last book where you were talking about the solutions as far as giving some kind of resolution to the way things are out of control, and the executive and the executive orders and all the insanity of all that, and how it's basically a monarchy, a kingship restored. And so, yeah, if you could give us a little bit more detail, some explanation, and set the premise for that.
Sure. The Constitution, everyone believes, as do I, that it's an inspired document, that it really is the first experiment in a republic, in a government that serves at the pleasure of the people, that the world has ever known. We've always been, ruled from the top down, always. So this is really the first time that the people had an opportunity to, take control of their government and have representatives take their concerns to a central government. We are basically a group of sovereign states that happen to live on the same continent that need a central government to govern the things that happen between the states and between the group of states and other countries. So the framework was very good. And then the framers of it, over a period of years, wrote a series of papers and arguments and debates on not necessarily weaknesses, but ways in which the document could be taken advantage of. And their biggest worry was that there was too much power in the seat of the executive. They knew that once you got 10 or 12 people together, there would be enough argument that the best idea would probably come forth. But with one guy in charge of one branch of government, they had to put a balance, a system of checks in place to keep one branch from overtaking any of the others. Now, the powers given to the president were a little vague at first. For instance, he's allowed to have a cabinet, and it describes a cabinet as being experts in certain areas of what that would require deep learning, which he doesn't have, and that these experts would align themselves with him. In other words, they could agree with him, but they would advise him on different things like economics or, logistics, things that a political president might not know. Then in 1929, a strange thing happened. We underwent a collapse, an economic collapse called the Depression. And it was going to last for a long time, it seemed, because the currency had deflated to a point where, a quarter could buy you all the food you could eat for a day. And in Europe, the opposite was happening. They had hyperinflation, and it would take you, 1,500 marks to have lunch. So there was just no fixing it. So when Hoover lost his second-term election to the very dynamic governor, Franklin Delano Roosevelt of New York, he came in, and within literally weeks, he unboxed a government in a box, like an agency government. And he put the CCC in place, and he sort of gave the IRS legs. And within, just a few months, less than a year, it seemed like the federal government had, people in soup lines and work being doled out. And it looked like things were getting back to some sort of organization. That agency government, because of the corruption that came in with it, and it's well documented that Soviet spies came in with that government in 1933, and they stayed, and they're still there. And that agency government continued to grow and grow and grow to the point where now it writes the laws, it assesses the taxes, it collects them, it assesses the enforcement actions and takes the enforcement actions, seizes our property, takes our money, puts us in jail, all of those things. But we have no representation in that government. None. And Congress is absolutely powerless to do anything about it. I don't think there's a single listener in your audience that hasn't been so frustrated watching hearings after hearings after hearings for years and years and years where they've come into Congress. Congress asks them questions, and they wiggle and they dance and they take the fifth and they obfuscate and they don't give any evidence. They basically just thumb their noses at Congress. And when Congress tries to do something about it, they're so unpopular. I think maybe just slightly more popular than hemorrhoids. The president can just have his way with them, and that's exactly what's happened. Now, fortunately, up until Bush Jr., we really haven't had anybody in power that was willing to use the power. Even when the National Defense Authorization Act, which was a horrible violation of the First Amendment, was put into place by Bush Jr., he didn't really use it, but it was just sitting there. But when Mr. Obama came to office, we had a guy who was willing to use all of those things. And now he's written 191 executive orders, 187 executive memoranda, which gets it pretty close to 400, which in wartime we got close to that with Truman. But we're not wartime. And a lot of these things have nothing to do with expediency of the federal government. They're just things that he wants to have happen. And it's out of control, and nobody will stand up against him. So the states now have about 40 states, which is more than enough to request the Constitutional Convention. However, unlike the first one that happened in 1787, which was a congressional constitutional convention, this one has no framework. No leader has come forward and written a framework that the states can agree upon. And they've met now for 2 years at Mount Vernon, and they still can't agree upon it. And that's really important that they do, because if they open a convention like that, it becomes Pandora's box. And then every special interest group you can think of, abortion rights, George Soros and his global tax aspirations, all of that would come in there, and it would ruin the whole thing. So what has to be done is a very rigid framework has to be agreed upon. It has to be put into place, and it has to be adhered to. Open it, pass the amendments, repeal the amendments that need to be repealed, close the convention, ratify the amendments, done. It could be done in a weekend, and that would unseat the agencies and take away their power to write law.
Huh, that's interesting. So um, who would get something like that initialized? Would it be?
If we could go find James Madison, he could write that framework. It could be done. But that's the problem, is there are a lot of egos. And when you're talking about state governments instead of congressmen, you think federal government's corrupt. Go to the state level. You'll definitely find corruption. Some states are better than others, but every state has its problems all the way down to the major cities.
Right. And so that would be the thing that would prevent something like this from actually happening and from some kind of fruition coming about, some kind of resolution actually being implemented from something of this nature.
Well, it's been 82 years, and now, the agency government is close to 2.3 million people. They have a standing army of, no one really knows the exact size, but it's probably around 350,000 troops here in the United States. Plus, they've been militarizing the city police departments for years, and mostly it's military veterans that are coming back and taking those jobs as policemen.
Right.
And we're seeing the stress of that, bust at the seams. Every time you look at YouTube, you'll see some kind of police brutality. I think at the last year, the previous 2 years, there were over 400,000 incidents of police brutality. Only 6% of them resulted in any kind of action being taken against the policeman.
Right. Yeah, they're out of control. I mean, like the whole video of the gentleman that had 5 police officers surrounding him and one choking him that actually resulted in his death, all for selling cigarettes on the sidewalk. I mean,
well, there you go. That's the local government using the boys in blue as revenue collectors. And that's basically what they are. I mean, yes, there are crimes that they go and stop and save property and life, but most of the time, most of your listeners' encounters with police are to get their money.
right. Yeah, the whole quota, as far as traffic incidents and that kind of thing, and they do, and then putting people through the whole judicial system, courts costs, and probationary costs and parole and all that. I mean, it's a lot. And then you have these privatized, as far as incarceration, all these privatized confinements and prisons, and so that's all feeding a whole nother side of the, all for money agenda.
Well, it's a multi-billion-dollar business, no doubt about that.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing how many people they've got going through that. And just not long ago, they showed how the private, as far as the prison system in California, they were paying judges to send youth and to detain them in these systems, and how there were egregious, just criminal activity going on in the privatized prison systems, where they were abusing these young females, and also, the just youth of all different ages that had no business being sent there, but because of the payoffs, they were being shipped off, into all these different places in order to be abused and detained, and at the benefit of the prison complex, so that they can make money.
Sure.
Yeah.
And, most of the people that are in there probably deserve to be there, but there's a significant number that are just victims of the drug war, which I'm sure is going really well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what do you think about the movement to to legalize certain aspects of, certain drugs in order to help certain populations. Like here in Georgia, even though there is no medical marijuana agenda other than they're trying to okay seizure medicine for these young children that their parents are having to go cross borders to, in order to secure this medicine, and then they are committing crime trying to transport this across state lines and putting themselves in jeopardy, and others are having to actually displace themselves and move to other states in order to have any kind of assistance for their children.
Well, there are 1,000, human interest stories like this, but the overall effect of both abusive prescription drugs and the illegal drugs, which, marijuana, cocaine, and the incredible huge shipments of heroin that we're getting from the Taliban, which, quite frankly, the biggest heroin pushers the world has ever known. This is why we have so many problems between us and our neighbors to the south. If we really wanted to see the immigration problem go away, what we really have to do is stop doing drugs. I know it sounds disconnected, but it's not. All the money that Americans spend on drugs does not go to just the, your local supplier. It goes all the way up the ladder to the kingpins that run the inebriation process of the United States. And it's a big process. It's been used for centuries. The British used it against the Chinese. The Chinese fought 2 wars to try to get out from underneath it. We don't even know who to fight. The CIA flies it in. The money goes all throughout the government system, the militaries. You just don't know who to fight. So the way to stop it is just stop doing the drugs, cut off the money supply. If you do that, the cartels will go away. I would say half the illegal immigrants we have in this country will just go home because they can. It'll be safe again.
The cartels, that's a bad situation. We don't even realize the extent of the criminality, and they're organized and, they're pushing, they do satanic ritual and have it institutionalized as far as their gang measures. I did a show with my friend William Kennedy, and he talked about this before his passing and about the kind of abominable acts that the cartels are involved in and the kind of psycho-torture measures they have implemented in order to, to basically rule in fear, and nobody dares to go against them, even lower local law enforcement, because they know they're at risk. They're going to be murdered in a horrific kind of way.
Yeah, well, I could just tell you that if the demand goes away, then the money drops out of the system, and then the criminality goes away. But as long as we're willing to pay for the drugs, and it's not in the billions, it's probably close to the hundreds of billions a year, then it's all black money. It's all off the books money. And when you have big banks like the world's largest bank, HSBC, gets busted by, they have a central authority which watches over the bank to make sure they don't launder money. They were laundering so much drug money that they fined them about $1.3 billion, which is just the cost of doing business. But HSBC had actually modified its bank teller windows and supplied the drug lords with special boxes to stack the hundreds in so they could push it through the window, and that way they could get the cash into the bank in a more timely manner instead of bringing it in pillowcases.
We've got go ahead, Brooks.
Well, they were taking in so much money that they had to rearrange their process to take it in. So they got a $1.2 billion fine. So what? They're taking in billions and billions of dollars every week. And Of course, it costs the drug lords 20% to turn it into clean cash. But then that's money that HSBC can, buy currencies and trade on the markets and do whatever they want to do. And all the banks are doing it.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. They're working hand in hand. It's just like even the governments, like the whole bombing the Fast and the Furious, the way that we're arming the cartels, and there's collaboration in that way. The banks and the Illuminati, and they are all working and have been ever since, even like what you were talking about with the opium, the British and the opium, flooding the markets there in China and creating addicts. It's the same kind of thing, the same kind of modus operandi. Which brings us to a question from the chat room. Monkey4310 wanted to ask you about the how the with the invasion of Afghanistan, how the increase in heroin, and as far as the farmers, planting the poppy, and how there's been just a huge rise in all that. If you could comment on that.
Well, I have several friends that served over there, and they were very close to this kind of operation. When they went over there, the original plan was to give the Afghani people another industry that they could get into other than growing the poppies. They have huge reserves of zinc and lithium and copper. They could be mineral magnates. Really, they could be on top of it. But what happened instead is the military went in and guarded the poppy fields, because this was the only source of income for a lot of these villages and even small towns. It got to the point where we were actually guarding the transportation of the poppy to processing. Now we're providing the transportation, and the money is insane how much money there is involved. It's way up there. So you have to ask yourself, who's in charge of all this? Who's giving the orders to the military? Why?
We'll be right back. Hold on, Brooks. Welcome back, everybody. For those that have just joined us, I have as guest with me this evening Brooks Agnew, and I just posted a link in the chat room for those of you that are watching the scroll, for his radio program, and also the connecting link to all of his books, the things that we're talking about here, and the things that we're going to be also going into. It's at x2-radio.com. If you have any questions, you can certainly inquire there. I'm sure there's a connecting link as far as a contact us button. But and also for those that may want to, if you want to call in, you can certainly do so. And you can ask Brooks a question or to share commentary. The Studio B number is 310-421-4053. And we'll just continue on, and we'll try to take calls as we can. I don't usually do that. But, when we have a guest as dignified as Brooks, I'm sure that he'd be interested in hearing from you as well. All right, before we move on, I want to, in this segment, I want to cover how it is that you came to knowledge and discernment and all these things, Brooks, but I wanted to pose one final question to you from the chat room and get you to finish up your commentary. The question was, do you know about the golden triangle and how that works? And so, finish up your comment before we cut off, and you can answer that, and then we'll go into the other part of it.
Well, I think the reference, the golden triangle, is to a group that operated out of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and they basically did the same thing. The military that served there saw that there was a connection that they could set up for the raw drug. They could put it onto military transports, get it out, get it to processors in the States, and they could set up for themselves, money back in the United States. And it was a lot of money. It went way high up in the ranks, and it covered a lot of officers and mostly CIA. I think that's basically where the CIA got the idea that they could take the cash that they make off the drugs. They could then buy weapons with it, and they could feed the weapons to rebels that they wanted to support to try to topple other governments. And they've been doing it ever since. Ever since the mid-'60s, we've been messing with countries around the world, and we have a reputation for it.
Yeah, they've got it down pat. I mean, the way that they have introduced coups and rebellions and revolutions, even, the target has largely been over the past few years, the Middle East, and overthrowing tyrants that they installed themselves, and that which had connection to the New World Order. But, for whatever reason, they burn those tyrants just as they do populations or agents or anything of that nature, just like they did Saddam Hussein and many others abroad. But so I wanted to just ask you, when was your awakening as far as the conspiratorial side of what's going on with world, the false flag terrorism, the controlled opposition, how governments, establish these different terrorist groups, fund them, arm them, and then use them as the boogeyman in order to drive further agenda, police state measures, homeland security, whatever it is that they're, trying to push. Whenever they need a convenient excuse, they can just parade one of the boogeymen,
Well, I think I was pretty much like everybody else. When I was younger, I was, truth, justice, and the American way. And when we would say one thing and some other country like Vietnam or China or Russia would say another thing, or the Soviets, I would just automatically assume they were lying. But then it as I served in the military myself, and I saw, the lack of integrity, not in the ranks. We all did our job. We did it very well. We were conscientious. We cared about everyone with whom we were serving. But when we watched, forces that could finish the job being held back, it started to call things into question. And as more and more information became available, which I have to say, in the days before the internet, a lot of this stuff was not available. So in the mid-'90s, started reading and started saying, well, is there any truth to the fact that, what they're saying? And then you would do research the other way as though you were them. And lo and behold, you'd find the evidence. And then it started to call into question what the heck was going on. And, 92, 93, we watched a guy who was a playboy governor of a state that had never made a profit. It was one of the worst performing states in the country, zoom forward and win the presidency. And it was like, I don't get it. I don't understand what's going on. And I was confused. A lot of people were confused. But the more research that I did, the more this stuff started coming out. Now, with cell phones everywhere and instant transmittal of information and documentation from credible but anonymous sources, it's very hard to hide. And it's very hard to – and that's what kind of got me into radio in the first place in 2005. I wrote the first book of the Ark of Millions of Years, and we worked on it from 2001, all the ancient civilizations and their plan for their society, for the planet, and how 500 years or 1,000 years would go by and their plans would fall apart and the race would disappear. As we got through that book and we published it, I thought, I had a co-author. Her name is E.J. Clark. And I said, we'll publish it. You buy 5 copies. I'll buy 5 copies. We'll call ourselves authors, and, at least we will have done it. But 90 days later, that book sold so many copies. It just blew my mind. We sold tens of thousands of copies, and I didn't realize people were interested in that stuff. So I got invited to speak at a conference, first time in my life. I was, like 52 years old. So I flew across the country and spoke at the conference, and I was there for 3 days listening to other speakers, and I discovered a whole world of people that were awake and aware and knew what was going on. And I just never went back to sleep. I just kept going from there. And I've been on the radio now 9 years, and the research that I've done, in a way, it encourages me because I see that there is a solution. But it also scares me at the level of propaganda that is being pumped at us 24 hours a day, the level of dishonesty that can come out of someone's mouth live on TV just blows my mind.
Yeah, I'm sure since you've been awakened for quite a while now, that you've seen a great change too, as far as in the consciousness of not only America but the world, especially since the events of 9/11 and how the official story, had held no as far as any weight of truth to it, and that there was so much that we were being asked to believe without questioning, and then also with the advent of the internet and the information that people could gain access to just by typing a few keywords into some search bar, and how it would garner a massive amount of hits, and then you could spend so much time going through all the various links to find to gain discernment on all these things, that it really gives you hope as far as the amount of people that are waking up, and I'm sure your listening audience is very well researched, as is ours, and the individuals that come to share fellowship with us, and in the the chat rooms and the sharing dialogue, asking questions, that they're very well researched and very well studied, and that it can do nothing but give you hope, especially when you consider that it only took like 5% of the population during the revolution, as far as here in America, to overthrow the tyranny that was then the greatest military and armed force and navy known to the world. And we're, of course, we are facing great odds, but I think that if people realize that if you empower yourself and that you stand up for truth and really decide to make a difference, that individuals, even myself and yourself included, we never thought that we would have done what we're doing, but that because we have been decided to side with truth and to stand up for it, that we've been brought into the roles that we are playing, and that many others can also do similar kinds of things.
Well, my career, I'm an engineer, so my job is to solve problems in the manufacturing of automobiles. So I look at systems that have been in place since the late 40s, or some since the early 60s. We've always made it this way. Why can't we keep making this way? And improve them, make them better. And so when I looked at the way government is interfacing with the people, and I noticed that we really have two governments here. We have the elected government, which we can go visit and talk with and vote for and call them on the phone. And then there's the agency government, just layers and layers and layers of bureaucrats who are not experts in your area, who write law and collect taxes and seize property. And I decided there's got to be a solution to this. There just has to be a solution. So that's, why I put the book together, why I wrote the amendments that I did. I think there's 6 amendments that I propose and 3 amendments that I recommend we dissolve. The first of which is the 16th Amendment, which is the power of the federal government to lay and collect taxes. We do away with that and go back to a system of tariffs and sales taxes, which is the constitutional way to raise money. That takes all the corruption out of it. Of course, you can't manipulate the classes against one another and perpetuate a political machine. I mentioned propaganda earlier. You can watch the news. Watch any congressman right now let's just talk about climate change just for a second. Holy cow. What a tremendous propaganda campaign this is.
Right.
It's worth trillions of dollars. And it just blows my mind to see science corrupted that way. We have an executive who could say, well, I'm going to send Oklahoma's National Guard over to Somalia, and they're going to beat people up and burn things for a while. And the state of Oklahoma has no say in it. The governor can't say, hey, wait a minute, you can't take our National Guard and ship them over there. But so there needs to be an amendment that goes back to a custom we had 375 years ago. I know that goes a long way, before the Constitution even, that governors have sole purview over their militia. And if the president has an official declared war, that's a different thing. But if it's just a police action, I'm going to go send these people to invade Greenland or Brazil or whatever, then the governor can say, I don't think so, Mr. President. I think our guys are going to stay right here. We had a hurricane or a tornado or earthquake or a fire, and we need to take care of that.
Right.
And that would lessen the power of the executive. But the power has gotten so huge now that it reminds me of the biblical times when you had kings, monarchs that were so corrupt, and you had prophets, prophesying to the king, if you don't stop doing this, the judgment of God is going to come against you. And almost to a fault, the kings would say, that's nonsense. I have the biggest army in the world. The biggest army the world has ever known. Are you going to send a flood? That's no problem. We'll just go to higher ground. We're not afraid of a flood. I mean, it's just that's the kind of attitude that we get from the federal level.
Right. Yeah, the kind of arrogance. And they don't believe in any sort of accountability nor any kind of repercussions to their actions. I mean, the kind of things that they're involving themselves with is just insane. Even like with the pedophilia and all of that's been coming to light, and like the whole the Franklin cover-up, and how sitting presidents and Congress people and senators, how they've been involved in the abuse of children, the sexual abuse of children, and for a long period of time, and that all of this has been known and even reported on back in the late 80s. Some of this was reported on and made even the front page of like Washington Post, things like that, but yet still no accountability. And so
that's true. I mean, you had the royals, the British royals, they would have a party, and they'd get together and take their cars by the orphanages, and they would just pick up kids and
right.
Take them out. And I don't even want to say what they do, but then in this country we have Epstein, who had his orgy island, and all of the presidents and congressmen and senators and wealthy people that visited his island. You can't touch these people. So Epstein was put on the sex offenders database or whatever. But you had the likes of Bill Clinton.
Right.
They had 21 of his phone numbers and his aide's phone number. I get the feeling that if something was going on, Bill didn't want to miss out. He wanted to make sure that you got a hold of him.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me also of the madam that had the little book that had all the
Heidi Fleisch.
Well, her, and then there was one that was just recently found suicided. She was hung, and she actually had a CIA operative. I believe he was a director of some sorts. He was protecting her because.
Oh, did we lose the call?
Can you still hear me, Brooks?
I'm here.
Okay. Sorry about that.
I lost you for a second.
Okay. But anyways, there was this other madam, and this was recently during Bush, and Dick Cheney his name was on her list, and she had basically said that she was going to spill the beans and start naming names, and then this CIA director was protecting her and keeping her from these other elements as far as the black ops, and they were trying to murder her, and they even killed him. That he was handcuffed on the side of the road after she was suicided. She was hung, and then this sheriff's deputy handcuffed him and then shot him in the back of the head on the side of the freeway. But that's just more confirmation of their above the law legality, as far as no repercussions to their actions and that kind of thing. But and this has happened to a lot of people, just like we talked about on your show. One of the senators here from Georgia, Nancy Schaefer, how she was murdered, and that there was a murder-suicide as far as her husband, and she was looking into the Children's Protective Services as well as on a state level fighting against the implementation of things like martial law and FEMA concentration camps, that kind of thing. And she was often the same kind of way. And this kind of thing happens a lot across the board. Even with that guy from the movie Gray States, and I believe his co-director just came out with something to say about all that. But
did they ever find the movie?
I'm not sure. I do believe I saw a link to its release. Now, as to whether it's the final version, I have no idea. I haven't actually looked at it. But if anybody in the chat room knows, if you could, give us an answer. They're a few minutes behind us, but I'll let you know what they say. But anyways, I wanted to cover another one of your books before we go to break, and then when we come back, I would like to go into some of the, as far as the prophetic word. I want to ask you about, your recent coming to the discernment on the two bloodlines and how that plays into what you see coming as far as, the future, short term and long term. But anyways, the science of soul and the specifics of that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. One thing that I noticed when I was very young, and over my life, I've participated in and observed different clinical studies where human intention, human consciousness is measured in not a quantitative way, but a qualitative way, where clinical work has been done to alter random number generators, to alter the pH of water solutions, the growth rates of bacteria. In scriptures, we would call this prayer. We would say, I'm going to pray for you, and so you exert your personal will on behalf of someone else. Jesus says this is the highest level of prayer, when you pray for someone else. And you actually, weep on your pillow for someone else's benefit. That is what we're supposed to be doing for one another. Well, in the let's just call it the New Age community, this is more of an energy contribution. Let's call it. It's a little antiseptic, but it kind of covers the same thing. What I found is that it isn't sometimes instantaneous, but it is cumulative. And I thought, okay, what are the principles of physics where this could actually make sense, where you're putting your energy, measurable or immeasurable, into a set, an experiment, a condition? Does that have an effect? And I wrestled with it for a long time, and I was actually teaching we'll cover it after the break. Sure.
Hold on. We'll be right back, everyone, for second hour. Welcome back, everybody, for second hour. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen, and this evening we have as guest with us Brooks Agnew. I do want to quickly remind everybody that we are the largest listener-supported, commercial-free, and corporate-free entity as far as on the internet radio network, and that there are 80-plus hosts here coming to you 24/7, all hours of the day, 7 days a week, on two studios, A and B. and that in order for us to continue in the endeavors that all of us as hosts have committed to, and bringing forth the truth that we do, and the different perspectives and dialogue on the many different things that are little known about and not well understood, helping you to decipher the illusion parading as reality, to understand the intricacies of the matrix and things such as government-sponsored terror, and specifically on my show, the biblical and prophetic word and how it ties together with the reality of our current situation as far as world and what we're dealing with. Please do support the network by going to freedomslips.com. For those of you that have access to the chat room, on the left side of the chat box, there is a donation button that there's many different offerings as far as the non-GMO seed pack, the bullet drive with the emergency articles, the coffee mugs, t-shirts, things of that nature. And also you can subscribe to the archives and gain access to all of the shows of every host on the radio network. And for $4.95 a month, you can download in MP3 form all of the different shows of all the different individuals that you like, and even those that you have never heard, and burn them to disk or a flash drive and listen to them as you drive back and forth to work, and not expose yourself to the commercials of mainstream radio networks, and utilize your time 100% in a productive manner. And so we appreciate you and thank you, and appreciate your fellowship and consider you to be a very wise audience. And so, Brooks, I wanted to cover once again before we move on what you were talking about as far as the science of soul, because I've also written about this, especially in my 7th book, Skyfall, Angels of Destiny, where I talked about how, as far as karma and dharma and our intention and what we send out into the world, how it multiplies and reflects back on us, and also how individuals, if they don't understand that they are co-creative as far as their ability, are connecting link with the creator, that energy has that kind of interaction and attraction with world, and what you send out will come back and reflect upon you, and that a lot of people are creating negativity or insanity just from habitual routine, just not understanding the dynamics of how this this law of attraction, law of energy, how it works.
Well, that's a really good intro to it. The law of attraction certainly got some good advertising with the book The Secret with Rhonda Byrne. She did a good job with that, and it got out there, and a lot of copies were sold. Good film, and What the Bleep, backing it up and all of that. What I found was missing was the process by which you put that energy into the universe. And I'll tell you how I discovered this. I was teaching a college algebra class, and I was teaching at night. And in that class, I had several adult students who were going back to college to try to upgrade their skills. And in the algebra book, you come to a section on an Italian philosopher whose name is Leonardo de Piso. And he was also a mathematician. He was known as Fibonacci. And, you teach this Fibonacci sequence, where you start with 0 and add 1 to it, and then 1 and you get 2, and 2 to 1 you get 3, and then, 5, 8, 13, 20, on like that. And you learn that sequence, and then it goes in one ear, out the other. You take your test and you move on. You never use it again. And I thought, why in the world is this in here, and why do I have to teach it, and how am I going to make it interesting to adult students instead of just kids? And so I was playing with it one night, and I said, well, what happens if I just start with any two numbers? Let's not start at 0. Let's start somewhere else. So I think I picked like 256 and 75. So one's odd, one's even. They're not multiples of each other. the two numbers don't even know each other. So I added those two numbers together to get the third, and then took the second and the third and added them together and just started as though I was continuing with this Fibonacci sequence. By the time I got to the 8th iteration, that is to say, adding the 7th number to the 8th number to get a 9th one, you could divide the 7th into the 8th and you got 1.618 to 1, which is the golden ratio. Well, I thought it was a fluke, it must just work with integers. So I tried decimals and it still worked. I tried fractions, it still worked. I tried imaginary numbers and irrational numbers and it still worked. And I said, there's just no way. If it works with any two random values in the universe, and then you add to it in a Fibonacci sequence, small at first and then growing and growing, you're on the golden mean within 8 iterations. And that is a ratio which we physicists and mathematicians know is a creative ratio. Our periodic chart is laid out that way. Planets are laid out that way. Atomic shells around atoms and molecules are laid out that way. Bacteria grows that way. It is the process by which order naturally comes out of chaos. A small amount, 3, 4, 5%, but that's about it. So I thought, if that's the case, then adding your energy to, say, a dream or a goal that you have is not a matter of just going out in the future and focusing on that one thing. Rhonda got it wrong. It's not a matter of putting a picture of it on your refrigerator or on your, bathroom wall in front of your commode where you can look at it every day. That's the wrong idea. The right idea is, okay, you go out in the future and put your energy on that goal, whether it's a relationship or a house or a job or an invention you're working on, money you're trying to raise to build a company. What you then listen for are all the things in the present that are resonating with that idea that you just put out there in the future. Instead of going out there and hitting the bell over and over and over again, listen for the things that are vibrating with the sound of the bell. I don't know if you've ever done this before, but I used to play guitar, and I'd leave my acoustic guitar against the wall, and then from time to time I'd turn my stereo up really loud, and somewhere in the song it would sound like somebody reached over on the guitar and just plucked a string, like it just hammered it. And what actually was happening from a physics point of view is the string was absorbing energy out of the room that was exactly the right frequency for the length of and tension of that string. Now, if you could have measured that absorbance out of the room, you would have known exactly what frequency to apply to make that sound. It's difficult to do. We do have instruments and electronic instruments that can do that now, but when it comes to human intention, it is a matter, as Jesus said, of only applying the faith of a mustard seed. Just little teeny tiny efforts, but at exactly the right moment, over and over and over again. And it creates a resonance. It creates a building effect so that even though you're only pushing with whatever faith and intention you have, you're doing it in an organized, exact manner, and you can create tremendous results. They're not so scattered. They're not so random. And it definitely is not a matter of luck.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just confirmation as far as what you're talking about with the string and how it resonates and captures that kind of energy and then makes its own sound, or as if it had been plugged. For me, that's just further confirmation as far as the dynamics of what it is we're talking about. And so in your book, well, how is it, what, as far as chapters or outline, what is it that you lay out? And are you teaching people, trying to empower them to understand their responsibility, or how?
Well, the basics are you gotta teach them how to dream first.
Yes.
In the interviews I did for the book, I would ask people basically a simple question: what's your dream? Most people would say, my what? Your dream, the thing that you thought you wanted to be for the rest of your life when you were 12. And it would be anything, fireman, astronaut, whatever, but they didn't accomplish it. They went off some other direction.
Right.
With women, it was mostly, I want to marry a rich man and have a big house.
Right.
What I found is that the dreams fell into two categories. One was solids, and the other was process. Very little process, mostly solids. And that means there are three aspects of reaping the benefits of this energy. One is to be, like to be a teacher, to be a philosopher, to be a painter, to be an architect, to be something. But it's not enough just to be. You can take all the education in the world, but if you sit on your front porch, you're still going to be picking crumbs with the sparrows. The next one is to do. You got to get off the porch and you got to go do. And the harder you work, the more sweat, the more effort you put into it, the more satisfying it is. And then the having comes. But what happens, and I think it's the trap of mortality, actually, because as one of your advertisements say on your network, we are spiritual beings having a mortal experience.
Right.
But that mortal experience can be quite intoxicating. And we are, at a very young age, kind of trapped in the having. I got to have Nikes. I got to have a cell phone. I got to have a nice car. I got to have a big house. Yeah, but what about the being and the doing? What about the work it takes to get there? Oh, I don't care about all that. I just want it. You got to give it to me. That's the trap we fall into. And even if we do work for it, and we fill our garage full of toys, and we expand our garage because we have even more toys, we've still missed the point. This life is not about accumulating all those physical things.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I write about these same things, and most people are totally comfortable and okay with the distraction and the entertainment, and then they never get beyond that, and they never actually adhere to the yearning inside them to try to seek out something more, to come to answer which helps to explain who they are, why they're here, what all of this is about, in sufficient manner that can bring them true comfort. And that's why, I myself personally study the Bible, the secrets of the gospel, and as well as all the various wisdom texts that I can find, worldwide. And in seeing the underlying truth of these things, I've been brought to understanding, which gives me fulfillment as far as these particular answers, and I share them in my work and my radio work as well as the books that I write. But still, even when you share answer in such way, there's only a few that are even interested, and then those that can come to the as far as relation and relate to what it is you're talking about, and that those kind of things can even make sense to them. Most people are caught up in the matrix and have no concern for anything other.
Sure. Yeah, and your listeners know what that means, but
right.
You talk to, the ordinary person on the street and they go, what are you talking about? They're typically not very happy. They're not very satisfied. They're like, it says in, Isaiah chapter 57, the wicked are busy all the time. They never rest. They have to keep working. You have to keep pushing. There's something, they got to work harder. They got to work faster. And they're never at peace. They're never at rest. Their heart is disturbed all the time. Now, when you say you read the scriptures and you go for the underlying meaning, Peter was a literalist. I mean, he was a big two-fisted literalist. And it was Jesus that opened his eyes to the spiritual aspect of what he was saying. And then, because Peter finally got it one day and said, thou art, Jesus, the Son of the living God, the Christ, the Son of the living God. Well, Jesus didn't tell him this. He said, that was the Spirit that told you this. That is a revelation. And upon that is what I will build my church. So it's the revelation that you get from reading the scriptures. That's why you should do it all the time, because there are layers upon layers upon layers of revelation that are waiting there for you. And when you're not reading them, you should contemplate the points that are made in that, especially between, the New Testament writers. Old Testament can get a little drifty, but the New Testament writers tend to put you a little bit more in the situation where you're contemplating those things. Great ideas and great solutions and great opportunities to serve come to you when you do that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Which, I told you that I wanted to ask you about your study of the Word and how you were brought to revelation as far as prioritizing the kingdom and, finding answer of some of these deeper aspects, more profound aspects of why we are here and who we are and our ways of being and all of that. And one of the things that I wanted to specifically ask about is your discernment now upon the bloodlines and also the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, and how knowing and understanding that in that way, how it's made the scriptures alive for you, and also tying that together with the, as far as the world condition and what we're dealing with the New World Order and all the presidents being blood related, and they're kind of working from behind the scenes, secret societies and all the oaths, blood oaths, and their duty and how they worship Lucifer, and how Christ said, "You are of your father the devil."
Well, that's a couple of very big questions. The first of which I don't mean to dodge, but I would be happy to spend time, telling you of my conversion story or my layers of understanding and revelation. But I think it would be self-serving, and I would just tell you that I've always been a good person my whole life. I've never been bad. I just was a good youth, and I lived a good life. I've never hit anyone in my whole life. I've never taken anything that doesn't belong to me, because I innately knew these things to be right. As I not only dove into the Bible, I also dove into other holy writings from all kinds of different traditions, and the parts that drew me closer to Christ, I paid a lot of attention to, and the things that drew me away gave me a stupor of thought. So I'm a student, and I study all the time. And study doesn't just mean read it once. It means to go over and over again, to intertwine things with mathematics and physics and music and architecture. And now I design electric vehicles, so it all comes together, and the ideas flow through that revelation, because they're all out there. You just have to tap into them. But what I did notice is that there are races or people on the earth that don't have that innate goodness. They don't. Yes. If left to themselves, they would choose war and violence and harm against others. They have to be taught. They have to be restrained. They have to be policed all the time. They don't understand the concept of punishment. It doesn't make any sense to them. To them, it's something to be overcome or ignored or endured. And good people aren't that way. Good people would never pick up a dollar that doesn't belong to them. They would never steal from work, time, or pilfer something. If they were given too much change at the checkout counter, they would feel terrible if they took it home. They would just turn around and give it to the person and tell him, "You made a mistake. You gave me a 20 instead of a 10. We wouldn't think of it. But and it always confused me. Did that person have a bad upbringing? I mean, were they raised by, vagrants, or what is the deal here? But when you told me, you actually turned me on to the idea, and it really opened up a lot of answers for me, that in the garden, the temptation of Eve was actually the compromising of Eve by Lucifer. And she actually bore that compromise, that Lucifer, a son, which was Cain. And then she bore another son from Adam, which was Abel. And what always confused me since that moment, why was Cain allowed to live? Why was he protected? Why wasn't he taken off the earth? Why was that seed allowed to grow and proliferate and become the antithesis of peace and harmony and love on this planet? They will never, ever be won over, ever. They are the tares for sure, but they're worse than that. They're not just growing up beside us. They're seeking our destruction. They cannibalize us. And we're a cheek-turning, God-loving, merciful, charitable people. We're always willing to give someone a second chance. But that side is always willing to take that second chance and make fun of our stupidity in doing so.
Right. And, you know, when we get back from break, I'm going to answer that question. But we're like 1 minute off, so I wanted to give you a chance to continue, and then we'll be back for final segment.
Well, that's basically my thought, that here we are in what I consider to be the last days. Of course, every writer, every talk radio host, going back to the medieval times, if they did have talk radio, says the same thing. We're in the last days.
Right.
Jesus is going to come and wipe them all out. But that may not be. It may be a couple hundred years off. So we have to be the leaders. We have to be the Christ now.
Yeah, I think the thing that is different as far as our generation is that whole parable of the fig tree, and how all that played out with the restoration of Israel as a nation in 1948, and how Christ said in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 21 that we, the generation that saw this, would be the one that saw his return. We'll be right back for final segment. Welcome back for final segment, everybody. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen, and I've been joined this evening by Brooks Agnew of X2 Radio, X2 squared. That's x2radio.com. Anyways, he's the author of 6 books and also a radio host on Truth Frequency Radio. You can find a lot of his information and the links at his website, x2radio.com. I wanted to start this segment by answering the question that you had put forth as to why Cain was spared or protected. And the mark of protection was just a temporary reprieve, because what happened is that Cain would be murdered later by what would be Lamech of his own bloodline, and that he was given reprieve, in my opinion, in order for him to be able to propagate the Canaanite bloodline, and that if he was murdered immediately, that they wouldn't have increased in numbers to, you know, what they were able to do as far as establishing a foothold. And we know that even with the parable of the sower, where Christ, the servants ask him, "Do you want us to uproot the tares?" And he said, "Let both grow till the time of the end." And then he would send his angels as reapers out to gather the tares for burning, and the wheat would be gathered for the barn. That the bloodline, or the seed of the serpent, that even after the flood of Noah's day, that they were allowed continuance. And I cover that in my work as far as my 4th book, Lucifer, Father of Cain, and specifically the 2nd edition. I do a whole elongated chapter on this particular topic. I'm not going to go into it here because we don't have time to cover that, but I have done shows on all that information. But anyways, both the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent would be allowed continuance for what would be the duration of the Second World Age. And that's why, in my opinion, that Cain was given a temporary reprieve, in that the mark of protection was only so that he would be murdered, but that, you know, the consequence, judgment would come from one of his own bloodline, and that the generational curses would therein fall upon his seed line. but that even with the flood of Noah's day, that the flood was brought on as judgment in order for Noah, who was pure in his generations, to be able to gain a foothold in what would be the renewed earth, or a restored earth, where most of the seed of the serpent and also the giants, which had come about as an interdiction of the fallen angels, the watchers in Genesis 6, and their marriage with the daughters of Cain, and the propagation of the men of renown, and how even in Second Baruch, a pseudepigraphal text, it makes mention that 409,000 giants were killed in the flood of Noah's day, but that there were giants before the flood and after, as it says in Genesis 6, but that was also in order that both would have continuance, and that it would be Christ at the end of days that would fulfill the reaping and ensue the harvest, which would separate the wheat from the tares. And so,
well, we know that the harvest is coming. We can all feel the separation going on right now. We can see the forces gathering. And the tares, which maybe some of your listeners know this, look identical to the wheat, except they just don't bear fruit. It's very difficult to go after the tares once they start growing together. And as I was trying to make the point earlier, people that are trying to be like Christ, which is what I really call Christians, not people that just believe in him, but actually try to be like him.
yes,
They're not a violent people. They don't want to buy a gun and point it at somebody else. They don't want to fight. They don't want that violence on their soul. They would rather be, not that it's desirable among all other things, but they'd rather be at ground zero and just be taken straight to heaven in a big bright flash than go to war. War is something that changes you. It changes you, and it takes generations to get over. You just don't get it over it very soon, I can tell you. So when you have a world of people who want to be peaceful, merciful, charitable, loving, productive, and care for one another, and then you have on that same world another very large population that only want to victimize, terrorize, and otherwise consume the planet, one makes very handy fodder for the other.
yes,
And I'm sure it was that way all throughout the scriptures, but you can see multiple times in at least the Old Testament where God's people had had enough, and then they go to war and they wipe them down to the last goat, and it takes them a few generations to build back up again, but they always build back up. That seed of Cain always seems to survive. It always seems to build on those secret combinations and, get through the cracks in government, find its way into the bureaucracies of Europe and Asia and the United States. And they get there, and the infection spreads and spreads until they become a force to be reckoned with again.
right. Like leaven, as it's mentioned also
Yeah.
in the scriptures, right? And they also, they have this whole modus operandi as it's laid out in the protocols, where they infiltrate covertly and then rule from the top down. Also, as it says in the Emerald Tablets, how they took over the council, the rulers, and then basically manipulated things until everything is like the New World Order, the agenda, how it is that all of the governments and the different heads of state and presidents and kings and queens, they're all working in tangent to push this world government, even at because the people don't support it, and we don't want police state measures and tyranny to be established, but yet they're pushing it. And
you bring up a very excellent and timely point. As I was explaining when we were discussing this on Sunday, the events that happened in France with Charlie Hebdo,
right,
his little 6-person or 7-person newspaper and some bystanders were gunned down. But if you look at the story, not by listening to the major media, but just look at the story, you got 2 brothers who were, basically bottle chuckers for 10 years. They grew up in a no-go zone in France, so they were completely indoctrinated. But it's one thing to go from heaving rocks and, making threats to dressing up in the best terrorist fashion of the day and going and shooting up a newspaper, knowing that the surveillance state is going to find you and they're going to kill you, which is what they did. That's only part of the story. 36 hours later, 40 world leaders, some of them had to fly thousands of miles on chartered jets, show up in France, arm in arm. They walk almost curb to curb with, some reported 400,000, some reported 4 million French people behind them in solidarity against this kind of terror. Well, that makes a good photo op, a really great photo op. But if you think about the logistics and planning it takes to get 40 world leaders in one place at one time secretly with only a 36-hour notice, I'm not buying it.
Right.
That whole thing was planned from beginning to end, which means we are being sold. We're being propagandized into supporting this next move that they want to make in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me of the events of 9/11 and how we went to war in Afghanistan immediately, and then the invasion ensued. And there was all this heavy equipment, tanks, and all of this in place. And that and all of that takes a long time in order to get this equipment, this machinery, and the war machine out there to be able to invade like that. And how FEMA was in New York on September 10th. I mean, somebody knew something somewhere. All the short positions that were established on the New York Stock Exchange. Somebody, the people as far as, I think it was Digimo, a company, an Israeli company, that none of the employees went to work on September 11th in the World Trade Center building. Even with Benjamin Netanyahu receiving a phone call on 7/7 to not go to his meeting because of the terrorist event that was going to take place there. The powers that be, they know. Even with Condi Rice calling Willie Brown and telling him not to fly commercially, the day before these particular events happen. And so, photo op, and because they control the opposition and they can pull the boogeyman out anytime they need. And so, before we do get to end of show, I want to give you a chance to talk about your trucks and where people can go to find more information about it, photos. I've heard that there's photos or videos of the incredible trucks that you make, these completely affordable electric trucks. And then if you would, Brooks, go into where you see what you see coming. Oh, and one other thing, for Blue Girl, the passage on the parable of the fig tree, or Israel becoming a nation, is found in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. All right, go ahead, Brooks.
Well, I've been in the automotive business since the earth cooled. And I've worked for large companies, Nissan, Toyota, General Motors. I've done contracts for Ford and Chrysler, and also Volkswagen. So after 26 and a half years, I guess, in the business, I retired and went into alternative energy. It's just an area that fascinated me. And I was up in Odessa, Washington, designing and building a new type of biodiesel manufacturing plant. And this was 2008, and the price of fuel was going through the roof. And all my associates back in Detroit called me and said, I think it'd be a good idea if you started playing with those electric cars again. We'd all monkeyed with them back in the 90s. You remember that story. We called it the shut up car, which is we took the grants, we built the car, now shut up.
Uh-huh.
And then we gathered them up and crushed them, which was probably a good thing. It wasn't a good design. It wasn't very safe. It didn't have a lot of range, didn't perform really well. It just wasn't time. The components didn't exist yet. And so I built a car in 2008, which did really well, but I could not find a source for what we call a glider, a ready-made body that we could, on a manufacturing line, convert into an electric car. So we sort of put our future-looking goggles on and said, what is the market going to be doing in 2012? And we realized that there were probably going to be 2, possibly 3 electric cars on the market. They would move slowly at first and then start to take off, but there wouldn't be any electric trucks. So we watched Ford very closely, and sure enough, right on schedule, November 2011, the Ranger went out of production, which was the last small truck in America, and we took over the market. We moved in with our own design of a 10-foot wheelbase truck that can carry 1,000 pounds, 100 miles, that people can afford, and we went particularly to the commercial markets. We have not even marketed to the public yet. But people can go to the website at ev-fleet.com, ev-fleet.com, and you can see pictures of the truck, videos. There are all kinds of newspaper articles and television interviews, and they can see the truck for themselves. Yes, we have just come through our FMVSS crash testing. We passed everything. Now all that paperwork is being sent to the DOT for approval. It could take 3 to 11 months. It depends on how long the bureaucrats want to sit on it. So hopefully by the end of this year, we are approved to be able to sell the vehicle in this country. And once we get to that point, we'll be in revenue, which is a great thing.
That is awesome. And I'm posting a link now in the chat room for those of you who want to check it out. I myself am going to be looking at it. But before we go into what you see coming as far as on the horizon, as far as short-term and long-term future, can you give all of your information out again, where people can contact you, all of that?
Sure. The easiest way to keep track of, all the projects that I'm involved with and books and appearances and movies and things, just go to x2-radio.com or put in X squared radio in Google or my name. It'll come up. I've been on the air for 9 years, and I just kind of centralize everything right there. You can get to everywhere you need to go from right there. And my direct email is bagnew@x2-radio.com. There's a link on that website, but that's the best email to get to me. And I answer all my emails, so don't think you're going to write me and not hear from me. I promise you I will write you back.
Well, very cool, and I appreciate your accessibility in that way. Let's go ahead, and the trucks look amazing, so I wish you well in your endeavor and hope to that all of this can come to fruition as far as helping America and also the alternative as far as fuel-based vehicles and all of that. And so I do wish you well and hope that it prospers in that way. But if you would, Brooks, go ahead and tell us what you see. We've got about 7 minutes remaining. What you see on the horizon and what you feel is going to happen soon.
Short term, we're going to see a series of cascading events. 2 very large economic forces are squaring off against each other. One is the BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's an acronym, but it stands for 123 nations. Germany has now just joined it, which is a devastating thing for the euro. That was precipitated by the Greek elections a couple of days ago, where they elected to stop following the pathway of austerity, which is basically like cutting a teenager off from their allowance, because that country, you wouldn't believe the retirement benefits in Greece. It was it was destroying that country. Absolutely. I mean, you could retire at 40 with full benefits, with free medical. There's just no way the country could afford it.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's going to pull Italy down, which is going to pull the euro down from the tail, which is really a sad thing to see. But the transatlantic banks have squared off against the BRICS. There have been several assassinations. A little over 40 bankers have been killed. We've had now 2 presidential candidates, one in Brazil, one in Argentina, both shot in the head, point blank.
Oh, wow.
Lot of forces in play here. And we've seen Russia's currency attacked. That wasn't enough to stop them, so the Saudis decided to go after all the shale and tar sands oil that we have in North Dakota. They killed it. The fracking companies and drilling companies have turned all the wells off. They're laying people off by the hundreds every hour. The banks that are on the hook for all that fracking equipment and drilling equipment, it's a bubble that's in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
Wow.
And all the investors bilked out of their money. They'll all lose. And it's just a matter of hours or perhaps days before we really see what this really means on the global economy. The United States sits on a fence. It can join the BRICS and this new kind of currency and new kind of central way of doing business and walk away from the transatlantic banks. But if they do, $700 trillion worth of derivatives will collapse. And that means if you have a 401k and you haven't sold it, you lost it. I hate to say it, but it's gone. So that's the near term. In the far term, things could stabilize if the transatlantic banks are not successful in forcing this to war, which they have done at least 3 times in our history, 1776, 1812, and again in 1916 all the way to 1945.
Right.
If we have learned those lessons and we don't get the rockets out against each other, we'll pull through it. And that's where we really need the consciousness of everybody that's listening to this program tonight to really pray for peace, to pray for a simple, clean, economic way of walking away from these world manipulators.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what would you, because we've got just about 3 minutes remaining, real quickly, what would you suggest as far as preparations? What kind of things could people do just to, even those that don't have a lot of money, what kind of measures do you suggest they take?
Well, it doesn't take a lot of money, but you should, every time you go to the grocery, be buying an extra couple days of canned goods and things that will keep for a year or so. You don't have to buy all the freeze-dried expensive stuff. But I would put at least a week's worth of food together in short order. If you can, put a month's together. You may have to walk out of wherever you are, so you don't get a year's supply because you're not going to be where you are right now. Right. If you live in an apartment or a big city, you're going to be walking somewhere. And clean water. And these are just basic things. Look at Venezuela, look at Russia, look at what just happened on the LI or up in Nantucket. They clean the groceries out in 2 hours is done. Right. And then there's no going to the grocery store and, hey, I think we'll buy a couple extra cans of beans. You need to be doing it now.
Right.
And once you have that safety net where you could hunker down for a month or two with zero income and survive, we're not going to talk about prospering. We're talking about survival. Then people that know how to do stuff will start putting things back together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a wonderful suggestion, and I do also pray that people can do at least that. Other suggestions, solar radio or batteries, candles, anything of that nature, medical supplies if you can, a first aid kit, stuff like that. But final commentary from you, Brooks. We've got 2 minutes.
I would definitely encourage people to look for the good in other people and help it to grow a little bit every day. Don't be so critical of other people. Stop gossiping about one another. Look for the good in others and help it to grow. That energy will rebuild your community, your state, and may save the planet.
Also, remember that, we're promised no tomorrows, and to do what you can to embrace your loved ones, really let them know how you feel, and realize that the person that you're speaking to today may be the last person you ever get chance and opportunity to speak with. So, God bless all. Thank you, Brooks. We'll definitely have you come on again when you
Thank you,
have
my brother.
the. God bless all. Good night.
Of one branch of government, they had to put a balance, a system of checks in place to keep one branch from overtaking any of the others. Now, the powers given to the president were a little vague at first. For instance, he's allowed to have a cabinet, and it describes a cabinet as being experts in certain areas of what that would require deep learning, which he doesn't have, and that these experts would align themselves with him. In other words, they could agree with him, but they would advise him on different things like economics or, logistics, things that a political president might not know. Then in 1929, a strange thing happened. We underwent a collapse, an economic collapse called the Depression. And it was going to last for a long time, it seemed, because the currency had deflated to a point where, a quarter could buy you all the food you could eat for a day. And in Europe, the opposite was happening. They had hyperinflation, and it would take you, 1,500 marks to have lunch. So there was just no fixing it. So when Hoover lost his second term election to the very dynamic governor, Franklin Delano Roosevelt of New York, he came in, and within literally weeks, he unboxed a government in a box, like an agency government. And he put the CCC in place, and he sort of gave the IRS legs. And within, just a few months, less than a year, it seemed like the federal government had, people in soup lines and work being doled out, and it looked like things were getting back to some sort of organization. That agency government, because of the corruption that came in with it, and it's well documented that Soviet spies came in with that government in 1933, and they stayed, and they're still there. And that agency government continued to grow and grow and grow to the point where now it writes the laws, it assesses the taxes, it collects them, it assesses the enforcement actions and takes the enforcement actions, seizes our property, takes our money.
And, contact.
Yeah, the best website, you can get to everything from there, is x2radio.com. And my email is just bagnew@x2-radio.com. So all of the links to all the books and the lecture series, and if you need to book me somewhere, all the links and everything are there.
Excellent. Well, let's pick up with the last book where you were talking about the solutions as far as the giving some kind of resolution to the way things are out of control, and the executive and the executive orders and all the insanity of all that, and how it's basically a monarchy, a kingship restored. And so, yeah, if you could give us a little bit more detail, some explanation, set the premise for that.
Sure. The Constitution, everyone believes, as do I, that it's an inspired document, that it really is the first experiment in a republic, in a government that serves at the pleasure of the people, that the world has ever known. We've always been, ruled from the top down, always. So this is really the first time that the people had an opportunity to, take control of their government and have representatives take their concerns to a central government. We are basically a group of sovereign states that happen to live on the same continent that need a central government to govern the things that happen between the states and between the group of states and other countries. So the framework was very good. And then the framers of it over a period of years, wrote a series of papers and arguments and debates on not necessarily weaknesses, but ways in which the document could be taken advantage of. And their biggest worry was that there was too much power in the seat of the executive. They knew that once you got 10 or 12 people together, there would be enough argument that the best idea would probably come forth. But with one guy in charge
of soul, he is also a host of X2 Radio. I believe that's Truth Frequency Network, exploring the mysteries of the universe and the earth, which comes every Sunday evening from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. He'll give you the lowdown on the specific links and provide that for you. I'm not sure if he has access to chat room, but if he does, then he can provide that there. If not, he can give it to me in Skype, and I'll pass it along to you as listening audience. He is also a multi-patented engineer and currently the CEO of a manufacturing company producing the nation's first affordable electric pickup truck, of which one of his listeners who sent some information to me and thanked me and asked me about the poem that I had written and shared with Brooks, told me that the trucks are just awesome in aspect, and so I definitely want to find out more about that as well. But Brooks, are you with us, brother?
I am here.
Well, thanks for taking the time to join us this evening, and we'll kind of go into a lot of different things. You did give me a small outline of topics, which are, things that I also am interested in. And I could tell just by the interview that we did prior that you're very eloquent in your ability to speak on many different topics. And so we should have an interesting conversation this evening. But if you would, before we go into it, which we'll, first talk about how you came to knowledge and discernment on some of these issues. But if you would, tell us about your books and your website, your radio programs, share the links, and, if you do take mail from the listening audience, how it is that they can contact you and inquire about all these things.
Sure. Well, the first 4 books are a series of books called The Arc of Millions of Years. Of course, you could buy them on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or all the online sellers, or you can go to arcofmillionsofyears.com, like Noah's Ark. And if you buy from there, you will get the book, but you'll also get it autographed, and you'll get the first 2 volumes for free in the form of audiobooks. So if you're not a really good reader, don't worry about it. I read it for you. And then the 5th book is a book called Remembering the Future, The Physics of the Soul and Time Travel. And it, I guess it kind of turned out to be more of a self-help book than anything else, but it covers the physics of the soul, how our individual conscious energy is added to the energy of the universe and specifically the earth, and sort of a better definition of what you can do with that energy on purpose to affect your life condition, the bounty of it and relationships and everything else. And that one can also be bought at any of the online sellers, or you can go to rememberingthefuturebook.com, because it's also a part of a screenplay for a movie, so there'll be another website in the not-too-distant future for a movie. And the same thing applies. You get the book autographed, and you get the entire book in audio for free if you order it from there. And the final book was sort of a culmination of maybe my observations and a possible solution to the dilemma we find ourselves in with relation to our federal government, in the sense that Congress has lost control of the country and the executive has taken over. So it's a book called Alienated Nation, The New Path to Liberty. It came out in 2012, and it outlines a path of a short list of amendments that we could make to the Constitution as states, rather than going through the federal government through a constitutional convention. This would be an Article 5 convention that would basically fix the problem and disconnect the agency government that now rules our country and allow us to get back to a republic.
Well, that's fascinating work. Because I want to pick up right there and to look into your solution, get you to present that to us. But before we do, your website.
Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join me in fellowship this evening as we come to you streaming live out of near Athens, Georgia for the next 2 hours, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, here every Wednesday evening on Studio B at freedomslips.com, Revolution Radio. I have as guest with me this evening Brooks Agnew, which he's a very impressive individual, and I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to go on his show just about a week ago or a few days ago, and we had incredible dialogue and shared a lot of good information with his listening audience, and so I have the opportunity to reverse roles and to be the interviewer this evening, and so we'll introduce Brooks. I want to give you a little bit as far as his bio, the information that is connected to the incredible endeavors that he's already accomplished and the things that he is doing. He entered the Air Force in '73, graduated top of his class in electronics engineering, received honors and a bachelor's in chemistry from Tennessee Technological University. He's a 6-time Amazon best-selling author and internationally renowned lecturer on the exploration of the earth and the physics